all my life, my worth had been put on my achievements and my grades and what I'd managed to do. And that meant that if something was going to go wrong, it jeopardized my worth. And then I looked back and thought, you know what, we're just so lucky to actually be here and be alive. And if we can shift our focus to those things that we enjoy doing, why we enjoy doing them, why we're lucky, what we're grateful for, life changes a lot then, because our thoughts do lead to our feelings.
You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey vet rehabbers, today I'm joined by Katie Ford. She's a veterinarian based in Manchester in the United Kingdom. She has a certificate in small animal medicine and has also completed training in cognitive behavioral therapy. So I asked her to come and talk about a really important topic, and that's the topic of imposter syndrome. So it's something that not a lot of us speak about, and there are actually a lot of us that suffer from it, and it's something that I suffer from. And what I found really interesting in chatting to Katie is that the people that you think that often have it all together are the ones that outwardly appear this way, but internally they're really struggling with self-doubt and confidence. So if this is something that you're suffering from, then this podcast is for you. Before we head over to my interview with Katie, a quick word from our sponsor. Choosing the right laser therapy and PMF system for your practice are big decisions, and that's why Response System has been helping to make decisions easier for over 35 years by offering both Class 3B and 4 lasers, as well as a full line of PEMF products. And these are designed for both small animals and horses. All their systems are fully rechargeable and adapted for international grids. You can find out more at responsesystems.com. You can also come and chat to the Response System team at the Vet Rehab Summit, our online veterinary rehabilitation conference on the 14th of November. So if all your conferences this year have been cancelled or postponed, you are not going to want to miss this one. Before we head over to Katie, I just want to remind all you vet rehabbers that I'm here for each and every one of you. So if you're struggling, you're going through a hard time, please, you can message me. You guys are not alone. So I'm here for you, the Online Pet Health team are here for you, and of course our community is also here for you too. So over to Katie.
Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi there. Thank you for having me, Meg. It's an absolute pleasure to come on the podcast and to talk about such an important topic.
I'm so looking forward to this. And I think it's a topic that a lot of us are affected by the syndrome, and we probably don't even know about it. Katie, before we dive into talking about imposter syndrome, can you please tell the listeners a little about yourself?
Of course I can. So my name's Katie. I'm a small animal veterinary surgeon. I qualified in 2012, so I'm 8 years out now. In the middle of that, I did my internal medicine certificate as well. But through my own journey, to be honest, at the beginning, didn't know that I had imposter syndrome, but I had all the feelings of it. I never knew there was a label to put to it or that it was a known phenomenon. So I had my own struggles with it, and that led me through a journey, first of all, of my own sort of improvements. But from there on, I realized that this was a huge problem, not just in the vet profession, but through all medical professions, through non-medical professions, through people in general. And the more I spoke to people, I thought, you know, I feel like I need to share my story. And that led to me doing more study. It led to me learning more about a topic called broadband consciousness, about CBT. I started coaching other professionals and providing speeches. I've been invited to keynote. And it's gone from being something that I struggled with years ago to being something I'm incredibly passionate about and speak on a regular basis on multiple platforms. So that would be me in a nutshell. Very, very, well, I won't say obsessed with imposter syndrome, but it is a fascination to me and something I'm passionate of talking about.
So can you explain exactly what imposter syndrome is? So some of us might not even have heard the name before.
Yeah. So the definition of imposter syndrome is the persistent internalized fear that you're going to be found out as a fraud. But what that looks like more so is you have an achievement, and inside, it's almost like you've either got that feeling, or for some people, it's a little voice that said, you don't deserve it. Everybody else is doing better. You got away with that again. or there's some sort of stipulation put on the achievement, like you only did it because you only got away with passing that exam because the questions were in your favour. You almost feel like you've been put in the middle of a profession or a situation. Everybody around you looks like they know what they're doing, and inside you're thinking, I've managed to get through the day again, but nobody's figured out that I actually don't know what I'm doing yet, or there's been a mistake at the exam office. So like we say, imposter syndrome is feeling like a fraud at the heart of it. There's a lot of different areas to it, but that might ring true and sound familiar to people. You just don't feel like you deserve what you've achieved.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about it, it's not the kind of thing that people talk about, right? Because you're not going to be like shouting out like, hey, everyone, I'm a fraud, well, I think I'm a fraud. So how common is it, if people are not talking about it, maybe there's so many of us that are just walking around having these similar type of feelings.
Absolutely, I completely agree, Meg. In terms of the studies that are out there, there's figures cited anywhere from sort of 20 to 87% of people. And the thing is, for me, when I was struggling with imposter syndrome, I did not look from the outside like I had any issues at all. I was a senior vet. I had my internal medicine certificate. I used to go on the radio regularly. I had a beautiful home, a brand new car. I had a huge client base that all used to request to see me. And I felt like that swan going across the lake. They look incredibly calm on the surface, and then underneath their legs are going 10 million miles an hour trying to keep up. So I think the reality of imposter syndrome is, and it's almost an irony, that you're looking and comparing yourself to all these other people saying they've got it sorted. And internally, they may well be feeling that way too, but nobody talks about it. So the illusion is, that person with their specialism's got it sorted. That person that's been qualified 5 years has got it sorted. That person that's just got 100% in their exam has got it sorted. But I don't feel like I have. And that's where there's that mismatch between people talking about how they feel and the external appearance. And that's one of the reasons why I share my story so much, is that externally, I looked like I'd never be underconfident. I used to get up, present to a whole room full of clients on our client evenings. I presented at conferences. I'd come off the stage and that little voice would jump in like, well, you said this wrong and you just about got away with that. I think you fooled them. But if they'd asked that question, they would have pulled you up and everybody would have realized that you didn't know what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, is it like certain types of personalities? Because, I mean, if I think about it, like, there's a certain type of personality that normally goes into a profession, right? So like, when I look at all my vet friends, not all of them, but there is a lot of them that are like that A type personality. So those people that like everything to be exactly right. So do they find that imposter syndrome is a certain type of personality, or can it affect anybody?
In reality, it can affect anybody. I mean, certainly one of the things is that in a lot of our professions, it is the realm of the high achiever, where we're the people that have started to pursue the qualifications. So we've almost got that bit of evidence to say, well, you got that on paper, but you didn't feel the way you expected. But to be fair, I've had conversations with people from so many different industries that have felt this way through so many different types of people. Like, one of the ones that I always think is such a strange example is I was helping my partner at a wedding show, because that's the industry that he's in. And one of the ladies that was on the stall next door, she runs a wedding cake company. And she came up to me and she said, I follow you on Instagram. I think I have imposter syndrome, because she makes these absolutely beautiful cakes, like that, amazing. And she said, I don't have any qualifications in making cakes. All these other people have had all these master baking classes, and they've gone through all of these courses. I just do it in my kitchen, and I really feel like I just don't deserve it, and I'm a fraud. And I said to her, look at these cakes that you've made. You didn't steal them. You actually made them. It's yours. It's your win. And I think that just goes to show how widespread that it is. We see it in our profession because that's where we are. But it's more of a human thing, I think, even rather so much than being a certain personality type. We might see it more, like we say, because we're at that point where we're getting the achievements and we're starting to do those bits more, that the feeling gets unearthed. But that example just shows you it can be anybody.
Yeah, so I'm going to share something with you that I actually don't think I've shared with anybody. So I don't think anyone in the vet rehab community knows this, but this is actually the reason, imposter syndrome is the reason I became a vet rehabber. So as a vet, I hated the fact that I had a little bit of information about different conditions and things like that, but I was not a specialist, because like I would see a skin case and then I would think to myself, like, I knew that I could try and treat the case, but I knew that a specialist would be better, skin specialist would be better, and then that medicine specialist is probably better for this case than me, you know. And so I was always comparing what I could do to a specialist all the time. And I thought to myself, I looked at these specialists and thought to myself, you know, they've got it together. They must be so confident when they get a case and they know everything about this particular subject. And it must feel really great to be the person that everyone says, oh, send it to Megan, you know, she knows about that. And so I made a decision to myself. I thought, I can't be a jack of all trades. Like, I can't carry on like this, because I just was always wanting to refer. That's all I wanted to do. Like, let me refer this case. And so that's why I actually specialized in a passion of mine. So I had always wanted to be a physiotherapist, an animal physiotherapist, from before I actually went into vet school. And so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to specialize in. And so that's the reason. But then I became a vet rehab therapist, and I still had it, you know. I still had times, you know, and luckily, I think for me, I think the biggest thing that helped me in my career was, at the time, we didn't have a lot of vet rehab therapists in South Africa. So it was so new. And so I was in this position where I didn't have anyone else to ask or refer to. So at the time when I opened up my practice, it was just myself and another vet. And she was about sort of an hour away. And I would chat to her often, and we would share cases and help each other. But I had no one. Everyone was sending me their cases for prosthetics and for braces and wheelchairs and things. And so I actually just thought, well, if not me, then no one else, and this dog is going to be put to sleep. And so that's what gave me the confidence, because I had no one else. I just had to do it. So that's a little bit of personal story from my side.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, because, you know, Meg, these things are so powerful for other people to hear, because there might be somebody out there that feels the same way and thinks, if I pursue that route, then I'll feel okay. And you've managed to say to them, look, I did still feel like a fraud even at that point. And you're absolutely right. When you reach that time when you get so much evidence back to say, look, I can do this because there isn't that other option, that can help. There are other things that can help, which we'll come on to eventually as well. But it's interesting because I work with a lot of people from different levels. And recently I was working with a diploma holder, so European and Royal College specialist. And they were actually saying that they feel bad when other vets ring them, because they feel like they should have all the answers in the world. And we were in a small group where we got a real mixture of newly qualified vets, vet students, vets that have been qualified 17, 20 years, and specialists too. And they were saying, I feel awful if a vet rings me and I can't give them the answer straight away. And we had such an interesting open conversation where the other vets were saying, you know what, if you as a specialist said to me, I don't know, I'll go and double check, I'd actually feel a bit better, because I'd be like, you know what? The specialist doesn't always know everything. Sometimes they have to check things. The clients don't mind, because if you say the specialist isn't so sure, they have to go and double check, your case is quite unusual, then the clients think they've got a completely unusual, one-of-a-kind case, and then it just adds more emphasis to the fact that perhaps they need to bear with you on the diagnosis a little more as well. So that was such an interesting conversation for us to have, because it highlighted to everybody else that had the specialist on this pedestal.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, where you just want to send them because you feel like they know everything. And they were the specialists saying back, like, I feel so much pressure that the book ends with me and I've got to know everything, and I feel like I need to know it straight off, and I feel bad if I have to ring them back. And it's conversations like that, like this, like the talks that I give, and just any conversation opening that up gives people an alternative viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think that someone who's a specialist would be thinking, you know, those kind of thoughts. So what are the signs and thought processes that are happening for our listeners, so that they can maybe recognize if they are suffering from imposter syndrome?
I mean, there's things that you'll feel and there's things that you'll do. So the feelings might be when you get an achievement, you might start thinking, I'm not good enough for this, start putting stipulations on the achievement. Well, I did it, but I didn't get full marks, or but somebody else did it better, or I just got the right questions on the day. So for people without imposter syndrome, what would happen is they'd go through an experience, they'd learn from it, they'd improve from it, they'd get a boost of confidence, and they'd move on. With imposter syndrome, whichever stage you get to, whatever achievement, whether it's getting your vet degree, whether it's getting an internal medicine certificate, whether it's getting a diploma, whether it's being a professor, still you feel like you got away with it, or that somebody's going to realize that you don't know what you're doing. And the external signs that you might see are you struggle to accept compliments. Sometimes you'll still put yourself forward to do things in the hope that you'll feel a little bit better once you've done them, because that was very much me. You'll be okay when you've got your certificate. Let's do that. Oh my goodness, I'm not. I need to do my synoptic exam. I've done that. I still don't feel better. Or it might be that you just say, I'm not good enough to do that. So you just don't go and do anything. But mainly looking at externally, it's those people that say, I only did it because of this. I only achieved it because things were right on the day. I only did it with the help of somebody else. The other thing is we find that in imposter syndrome, a huge part of it is a fear of failure as well. And that's a huge issue amongst all professions too. So there's something, I can't show it on here at the moment, but I'm sure people can look it up. The people that first denoted imposter syndrome in the 70s were two ladies called Suzanne Imes and Pauline Clance. And then further from there in the 80s, they developed something called the imposter cycle, which might be familiar to people and might be something that they think, yeah, that's me, and helps them identify imposter syndrome. And this is a cycle that starts with a new task coming along. So whatever you're set to do, it starts with the fear of failure, because through our lives, we might have been told by friends, family, the media, school, often we don't know when it started, that failing is a bad thing. Failing makes you a failure. That might have been that you failed an exam at school, or you were just terrified of ever failing. So that does one of two things to people. The first thing that it might do is that they want to hide from doing the task, because that fear of failure means let's just ignore it, let's pretend it doesn't happen, let's procrastinate. You might have 8 weeks to do a task and you put it off for the first 7. The second, I say half, but second group of people, they're the ones that say, I've got 8 weeks to do this task, everybody else does it so much better, I better absolutely work like crazy and put extra amounts of effort in for these 8 weeks to get this done. So you're either driven by failure or you're paralyzed by it. Then the next step of the cycle is you complete the task. The task is done. You're relieved because you've finished. You think, oh, goodness. And then we look back and we assess what's just happened. And that depends what filter we've had installed over the years. I think of it as that almost that little voice that jumps in and says either, for those first group, it says, well, you did it in the last week. So you got away with it. You scammed it because you did it in the last 7 days. You didn't work as hard as you should have done, but you've just about got away with it. The other group, they say, well, you worked much harder than anybody else. You made it look much more difficult than it should have been, which is the irony, because they're polar opposites, yet they're still giving themselves no credit for doing it right. And then from there, as you move on, you've made some conclusions that I got away with it, but I didn't feel like I deserved it because of this reason or this reason or this reason. And then comes a new task again, at which point you start feeling a bit anxious and fearful of it, because last time you did it, you didn't feel any better for it. You got away with it. And it carries on going, perpetuating every time. So that brings those signs of imposter syndrome, like we were saying, I didn't deserve it, I got away with it, not getting that feeling of achievement because you've assessed it and said, well, I didn't do it right. So I'm sorry, that was a very long answer, Meg, but no, that gives you a bit of an insight.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I want to ask you is it something that comes and goes, you know, like is it in certain times of your life? Because I mean, if I think back, you know, when I'm having my periods of when I'm really confident, then everything's good. And then I don't know, I'm trying to pinpoint, you know, it's hard to think back now. So I'm more aware now. So in times now, because I mean, even in myself, you know, I lack confidence in things, you know, and people will think, how can you lack confidence? You're such an extrovert, you know. But I do, you know, at times. And then there are other times where I'm okay. So is it something that can come and go?
Absolutely, it is. And it's different for every person. So some people will have imposter syndrome at a low grade, ongoing, and other people will get it spike at certain points. And it's thought that quite often imposter syndrome will jump in, ironically, when we're growing. So when we've grown up, like we'd almost said a few minutes back, we almost get this certain set of beliefs about what we're capable of, which come from friends, family, the media, a lot of the time without any knowledge to us. So when we're pushing those beliefs about what we're capable of, often imposter syndrome jumps in because we're pushing sort of comfort zones that we didn't choose. We didn't choose any of these beliefs. We might have been in a family that taught us that our worth lies on grades, or that you might have had a bad experience when you were younger with, say, a public speaking engagement in an assembly, and since then you've been terrified from that one time. And then if you go and you start pushing those boundaries of those deep set beliefs about what you're capable of, then imposter syndrome can jump in then, because it's almost like that little voice comes and goes, no, this isn't you, you can't do this, hang on, come back. And for some people that will drag them back to where they were because they want to be safe and comfortable. And other people push through it, but as they're going through it, they feel uncomfortable because those beliefs are being challenged. And that, as we say, that little voice, as I think of it, goes, stop, this is terrifying. Remember last time you did this was awful. So for a lot of people, it is that stage of growth. Now, again, there's a good diagram for it, and I'm sure a lot of people will have come across the Dunning-Kruger effect previously. I don't know if you've seen the graph of that.
Yeah.
So they think that imposter syndrome almost lies under that second half of Dunning-Kruger. So for anyone that's not seen it, basically along the bottom, you've got knowledge and expertise, and across the top axis, you've got confidence levels. So you start off, and it's almost like the classic that you might see with clients or with newly qualified people, where they get a little bit of knowledge and they feel very confident at the beginning. So maybe the client that's read a blog, and suddenly you feel like they think they know far more than you. So you get this peak, which in the Dunning-Kruger effect, ironically, they call Mount Stupid. Then as you start to realize there's actually a little bit more to learn, your confidence drops, because at that point then your thoughts are, oh my goodness, there's a bit more to this than I ever thought there was. Look how much more there is that I don't know than I do know. Oh, and then confidence plummets. And then slowly, as you start knowing more, your confidence slowly builds again, until the point where you're at expert level and your confidence has come up. So what can happen is, as that confidence is growing still, imposter syndrome is jumping in saying, well, you know more, but you don't feel better. And eventually you might lead to that point where, yeah, I know enough that I feel confident. But if then you go and learn a new task, or you go and do something different, like you're saying, you go and do something that you've not done previously, or you extend into a new wing of what you're doing where maybe you've got less knowledge, the imposter syndrome can jump in and you can feel fraudulent or underconfident, again, despite external circumstance. So there might be a way for us to link to a picture of Dunning-Kruger diagram, maybe in the show notes afterwards, so people can see that. And the irony I always find is that confidence level in the expert zone never really actually hits that level, the first level of that Mount Stupid, how confident people feel at the beginning, which is why sometimes we'll see that you'll have people that are specialists and there'll still be somebody that will come into them and say, well, I know this, this, and this, and they look more confident because it is a Dunning-Kruger effect in action.
Yeah, we've actually, and Ine, who's the veterinary physio that works for Online Pet Health, she actually wrote a brilliant blog on the Dunning-Kruger effect. So for the listeners, we'll put that link in the description notes. So I think the big question is, Katie, what do we do about it? I mean, so if you are a person that you now recognize, I am suffering from imposter syndrome, like how do we sort it out? Because it obviously affects our lives. And it potentially can hold us back in our careers professionally.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really important point to note as well that if you leave imposter syndrome completely without addressing it. And it can progress to other things. It can progress to anxiety. It can progress to depression. I don't have time to tell my whole story here, but I struggled with it alone internally, despite all those external appearances. And it left me in a very bad place because I didn't know it existed. I didn't address it. I just constantly felt like I was spinning plates and trying to hide my defects. And I'd be up all night worried with it. So if people are really struggling with it and it's at the point where it's causing you a lot of anxiety or mental health type issues, the first thing I'd say is it's worth going and speaking to a specialist or a therapist or the GP, because right at the beginning of my story, that's what I had to do. And I left it way too long. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about this. If you're one of those people that's in the middle of the road where you're starting to get these niggly feelings, but it's not causing you that much trouble, there are things we can do. And the first thing that we've got to understand is that feelings always arise from thoughts. So when we want to stop feeling like a fraud, we've got to start with considering what thoughts are we having around being a fraud. So what I always explain to people is we've got to understand that thoughts aren't facts. So if you start just pulling up what you're thinking, and we can choose not to believe some of those. So the more that we talk about imposter syndrome and the more examples we can pull up from this conversation alone, they can see you, Meg, who's brilliant, and you're saying, I felt like a fraud. I'm here with an internal medicine certificate, years of experience, all those things, and I say, I felt like a fraud. I've also used the examples of a specialist that's felt like a fraud. I've had top nurses that have felt like a fraud. There've been professors that have felt like a fraud. You can pull that thought up and say, right, if it's not true for all of those people, maybe it's not true for me too. Because like we'd said way back at the beginning, a lot of these thoughts have come from situations that we didn't choose over the years. So the first thing that I'd say, and when I did my talk at the Global Vet Summit, I did talk about, I have a little acronym that you can use. So my acronym is FRAUD, F being, first of all, that fear of failure, because that's one of the drivers of that cycle that we talked about. So what we need to do, we need to disarm that fear of failure. So that thought that we have about, oh my goodness, I'm so scared if I fail. Let's examine that. Let's visit the worst case scenario. If you fail, will you be able to handle it? Yeah, you will be able to do. One of the things that I talk about a lot when I did my internal medicine certificate is I ended up telling myself the story of, if you fail this exam, it's actually a really good opportunity for you to show all the people that you work with that your worth doesn't sit on an exam result. And if you fail, you can get back on the horse, you can revise again, and you can show them, you know what, it doesn't matter. Because that's what I tell them all the time, but I never actually had any opportunity to show them that that's true, because it's one thing telling them something, but it's another thing leading by example. So when I went into that exam, I thought, if I pass, I passed. If I fail, it's actually just a great opportunity to show them it doesn't matter if you fail and that you can carry on. And knowing, again, we talk about it a lot, that fear of failures are actually building blocks. So we can either let our failures sit on top of us and crush us, or we can stand on them, because there's actually a lot we can learn. So just start by, if you've got a big situation coming up where imposter syndrome might jump in, visit the worst case scenario, look at a different route to call that failure. There'll be a different way to see it. Maybe it's going to send me on a trajectory in a completely different direction that's going to be a lot better. Maybe I'll just learn from it. Yeah, I can resit. And you immediately disarm that, which means that cycle is stopped then. You say, well, I'm doing it because I want to. Then the R in fraud is to redirect our focus. So we focus on all the reasons why we don't deserve something, because that's almost that filter that we put on the world. So we've got a section of our brain, our reticular activating system, which I don't know if anybody's spoken about previously in the podcast, but it's that section that means that when you're looking for, say, a new car, you've spent ages looking through the catalogues of, say, for example, a Toyota Yaris. Then you're on the roads and there's Toyota Yaris's everywhere. Now, the reality is there aren't more of those on the roads. You're just spotting them. So sometimes when we start looking for the reasons why we don't deserve something, or why we're a fraud, or our mistakes or our failures, we end up shutting out all the things that actually went well, because we end up, our brain, just looks for what we've been putting our focus to. It just pulls it out, because at the end of the day, you've got hundreds of thousands of millions of pieces of information that you're being bombarded with, that your brain has to make a decision, what are we going to look for? So redirecting that focus, that R of fraud, is, can I look for what went well today? Can I look for my wins? And the way that I do this is I have a wins list at the end of the day. So I have a notebook, I write down 5 things that went well. These do not have to be 5 Oscar nominations or 5 huge things. These are literally just, something went well with a case. I managed to, I don't know, go and have a run. The client sent me a card. I got a lovely comment, or I managed to get my lunch break. Just something that is a good thing of the day, just to start redirecting your focus. The same thing you can do with gratitude. It's a long podcast for me to have to go into gratitude, but I've had papers published on gratitude and its positive effects in potentially medical and veterinary worlds as well. So that's listing things you're grateful for, does a similar thing of redirecting your focus, redirecting your brain to where you're putting your attention. A fraud, that's alternative story. So like we say, is there a different thing that I can tell myself about the situation? Whereas that fraudulent voice wants to come in and say, they're going to find out that you don't know what you're doing, this is all going to go wrong. You can say, you know what, I'm new at this. I'm not going to know everything. I'm a GP vet. I've got so much that I'm trying to do on one day. Of course, the specialists are going to be able to focus more on that one topic, because they're not a specialist in dermatology and medicine and orthopedics and neurology, because nobody is that. You've only got so much that you can know. And GPs are hugely, hugely valuable people, because they'll have a hamster comes in 1 second, and then they'll have a parrot, and then they'll have a dog, and then they'll have a cat, and we have to deal with them all. So one of the ways we can look at that alternative story is looking at visualization, which is again another powerful tool which can trick our brain, because our brain again doesn't know the difference between something that has happened and something we've imagined. We quite often visualize in a negative sense, and that is that we'll go and we'll think about what's going to go wrong, and we've almost played it 3 times in our head of the scenario being a disaster before it's happened. So looking at visualization. And then your final 2 letters, without me keeping you too long, but U is understand when this is going to pop up. So we've already touched a little bit on this, but understanding when imposter syndrome is coming looks at, when am I doing something out of my comfort zone? When am I growing? Have I got a new venture that's coming up? Is there a qualification coming up? Have I got a complicated surgery coming up? And then you'd start looking at, how can I use these tools that we've just talked about? So the complex surgery that's coming up, you can say, look, F, fear of failure. Let's see, have I talked through all the pros and cons with the client? Do they understand that there's a chance that this might not work, or that there are other options? And at that point, you can say, look, well, I've discussed everything with the clients on this one. You are, redirect your focus. Let's think about what has gone right to date. Look at all my good surgeries that have gone well, rather than looking at the one that went wrong 10 years ago, for example. Alternative story, just explain to yourself, look, I'm trying my best here, visualize it going right. Is there anything that you can actually do? Can I go and look up some tips on how to do this differently, rather than sitting and worrying about it? And again, just know that maybe it could be that we reframe that as thinking, I'm growing. So maybe I'm feeling a bit fraudulent, a little bit nervous from this, because these thoughts are popping in, and I can identify them and say, you know what, this is a little fraud thought. Let's look at one of those alternatives. And D is the important one, which is discuss. Just discuss it with other people. Talk to friends, family, peers, other people about it. Look at other people's imposter stories and realize that actually, if it's wrong for them, maybe it's wrong for me as well. And that was a hugely powerful thing to me. The more, even now that I do an imposter syndrome, I realize that it doesn't matter what qualification you've got or how much you've done. If you've got that deep-seated belief that we didn't choose, that formed without us knowing, as we say, we're born a blank slate, and then all these things just get bombarded to us over the years, then you end up with this filter that we put on the world of, I'm not good enough, despite what you throw into it. And the real change comes at the top of almost our identity triangle, which is where you say, you know what, actually, maybe all those beliefs I didn't choose, and I didn't have any input to when I learned all these things. And I don't have to believe every thought that pops in, even for you, even for anybody that's out there going, oh yeah, but for me, it's true. No, none of you. You weren't everything that you did up until this point. So that just gives you a little outline of a few things that you can do with that acronym. But I think the main thing is just knowing you're not alone. You're not the only person to feel this way. And if at least you can believe that it's not true for all these people that you've heard the story of, believe it's not true for you too, and look at where we can redirect that attention to.
I love that acronym. That's great. So let's just go with, so it's F for fraud, R for redirect, A for alternative story, U for understand, and then the last one is D
for discuss.
Discuss, yes. So talk about it. So, I mean, what I'm hearing you saying is that, you know, if you're actually aware of this and you acknowledge it, you can actually use this positively and actually help you grow, right? So you can use imposter syndrome now, like once you know don't make it a negative thing, you can actually make it a positive thing and grow in yourself.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's really useful is, you might have heard it from other people in self-development, that our brains don't know the difference between nervous and excited, for example. So if we're really nervous to go on stage, or that's how it feels, the physiology is very similar. So racing heart rate, maybe a little bit sweaty palms, feeling just a little bit tense, can be the same physiology as excitement. So the way that some people will use that is before they go on stage, they go, I'm excited. And eventually your brain believes that. And it's quite similar on the imposter syndrome front as well. You think, right, this little voice, this little inner critic is jumping in because I'm growing, right? I hear you. I don't want to believe you, but you're here because something big's happening. And that's the way that I reframe it a lot now, because I'll be the same as you, Meg, where sometimes I'll have periods where everything's going really well. It jumps in for the odd thing, but I don't really notice it. And then occasionally something will come along, like I might be invited to talk at a huge conference where it wants to jump in and say, why have they invited you though? Maybe they should be inviting a PhD holder or a professor. Yeah. And then I have to say, you know what, actually, maybe this is because something bigger is happening. And then I do all those things in the acronym and I say, you know, I've gone through a lot with imposter syndrome. I have trained, I studied it a lot. Somebody out there thinks that I should be giving this presentation. So I don't need to listen to you on this one, but I know you've jumped in because I've just stretched through one of its comfort zones that, again, we didn't choose. So some people will say, oh, I love it when imposter syndrome comes because it means that I know I'm definitely growing. Some days it is more difficult to feel that if it's really shouting. And I've experienced that too. So I won't say, oh, every single day when imposter syndrome comes out, I love it. But it does help you deal with it a little bit if it is having one of those days where imposter syndrome is a little bit noisier than usual. You could say, you know what, I'm just going to be kinder to myself today. I'm not going to make any big decisions. I'm going to know that, yeah, these thoughts and feelings have popped in because I'm pushing comfort zones. I'll get back on it tomorrow, but I know why it's coming. So yeah, it can be a marker that actually you're stretching yourself.
Yeah. And I love what you said about practicing gratitude and actually like being a believer in yourself. So, and that's when you have imposter syndrome, that is difficult. But you can take it little small steps, like you say, just like write down your wins. So, I think that when you have imposter syndrome, you're so focusing on all the things that you think you shouldn't be doing that you forget all the things that you do. So if you actually sit down at the end of the day and write down your wins, you'll be like, oh, wow, I actually did all of that, because you just completely forget. You know, and if I look at the vet rehabbers, I mean, vet rehab therapists are amazing. Now I'm shouting about myself now because I'm talking about our community. Like, we teach paralyzed dogs to walk again, which is amazing. Like, there are vets that will operate, so we have surgeons and the dogs still can't walk, and vet rehabbers are able to do that. And so I just want to remind you guys that are listening that you guys are amazing, and I want you to write down all the things that you do. And you take for granted all the things that you do. You just forget about it because it's in your day every single day. But take that tip of Katie's. I think it's a great one. Write down all your wins every single day.
That's it. And there's so many things that you guys do that I would not have a clue how to do, despite being a vet with an internal medicine certificate. Like, medicine's my thing, but I'd have no idea. I'd refer to you guys and then know they were in good hands. And that's where gratitude and where looking at wins really comes in, because quite often we can't see the wood for the trees because we're too busy looking for the things that went wrong. But if you just took a member of the public and said, can you just do my job for the day? They'd have no idea, because you so take for granted all those skills that you have. They'd say, oh, you might even have someone, what breed of dog is this? Is this like, what do I even do? Do I bring them in the room? Like, all these things that you do every single day that are so normal. And that's why just putting the focus on those has so much value. And gratitude has so much scientific evidence behind it for things like reducing depression scores, reducing perceived stress, reducing heart rate variability, improving positive emotions, improving relationships, improving sleep. The evidence for gratitude is non-stop. So if at the same time as making that wins list, you can make a list of things that you're grateful for, those two lists will look like they cross over a lot. And again, like I said right at the beginning, a lot of people in our professions want to have these 5 massive wins for the day. But like Meg's saying, a massive win might actually be something that's become quite normal for you. So just say this appointment went really well. That 5 years ago might have been a huge win for you, but it's just become normalized. So it just retrains your brain to look for those things.
So the last thing I want to touch on before we finish off is you mentioned about visualizing, and that your brain is unable to actually distinguish what your thoughts on what's actually happening. And I know that sports people do this regularly. They visualize the race continuously. Do you have any tips how we can use that in practice? So like going through cases, maybe a case you may be scared of. I'm just thinking, like actually it's maybe a condition that you haven't treated before and you're feeling a little bit like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, and you're worried.
Absolutely. Certainly first I'll just tell you a little bit about science behind it, because I know years ago visualization was seen as something that was a little bit woo-woo perhaps, and people thought, I'm not just going to sit there, and same as what they thought for meditation years ago too, they thought that was very similar. So there's a lot of studies. One of the biggest ones is called the Harvard Piano Study, where they had two groups of people. They had 5 days, and for each day they had to do 2 hours of piano practice. So they just had 5 keys that they played for 2 hours. They could have small breaks, but it's that 2-hour period. And then at the end of the practice, they had a brain scanner on an EMG, and they had to play the 5 keys. And they looked at scanning the part of the brain that was responsible for controlling the fingers in that circumstance. And they did this for 5 days in a row, saw how much that area of the brain lit up. The second group of people just had to imagine that they were playing those 5 keys. So they didn't actually physically do it. They had the hand flat and they did it, and they scanned again. And they found that those 2 groups actually had the same area of the brain grew in the same way, regardless of whether they actually physically played the keys or whether they pretended and thought in the head. So it shows you a little bit about how much that imagination and going through it does affect your brain physically. And similar, they had one where someone had to flex a little finger for weeks, and they'd do 15 minutes a day for 6 to 8 weeks. And the strength of the little finger improved by, I think it's 52%. And the people that didn't flex the finger, just imagined, they still had a 37% increase. So that just goes to show you how powerful this can be for us. And the final one would be, if we don't think that thoughts can affect us physically, think about if you were to close your eyes, imagine going to the fridge, grabbing a lemon, sucking on the lemon, you'd start to salivate, even if you weren't picking a lemon up physically. Or you get so into a movie that you're watching, your heart rate's going and you're in a jump scare, you're in your living room, you're not being chased by a shark, yet your body still feels that it is. So ways that we can use it. The way that I used to use it a lot was in the morning before I went to work, that imposter syndrome voice would normally jump in and say, what if all your cases have come in overnight and you missed something on them? What if it's a really busy, horrendous, awful day? What if you don't manage to finish this on time? What if you're constantly just playing telephone tennis with people? And I'd sit there and I'd spend 10 minutes. To begin with, it was just 1 to 2 or even less than 5 minutes, just because it takes a while to get used to visualizing. I'd set a timer on my phone, I'd close my eyes, and then I'd just imagine what it would look like, how it would feel, even to the point of like smell, taste, touch, of walking into the practice, looking at the list, saying, yep, I can handle all of this, having a big smile on my face, saying good morning to everybody, having a nice, smooth running day, and looking at the things that I can control. Because at the end of the day, in the vet profession, we can't control how many animals get sick. As much as we want to will the telephone some days not to ring, and we want no emergencies to come down because the day's busy enough, we have no control over that. But if you shift your focus to, right, how did I feel? Right, I was in control, I was calm, I knew where to ask for help. So like you're saying, if you've got a new condition that's coming up, there's two things we need to look at with it. Visualization, yep, useful. So if you say, right, this is a certain case that I've not seen previously, right, I feel calm, I feel in control of what's going on from what I can control, my attitude. I go in, everything goes to plan, I feel good, the clients feel good, the patient feels good, the outcome is how I'd like it to be. The second half is obviously looking at the information that you can gather that's going to help you with it. So that's one thing that you can do. If you do that alone, then quite often that little imposter voice comes in and goes, not going to work though, it's not going to work. So you use what you've just learned as the extra information and put that in with the visualization. So sometimes I'll do it for a surgery. I've read Fossum, the surgery book. I've read how it's supposed to work. I'll close my eyes. Okay, I'm in theatre. Big, deep breaths, because again, our body's physiology can be tricked by our breathing rate. So I'll make sure that I slow my breathing rate down to sort of 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, which stops that sympathetic nervous system kicking in and going, oh my goodness, this is all going to go wrong. And you end up with thoughts leading to nervous feelings, leading to nervous actions. Then you get results you wouldn't choose, which then leads back to your thoughts. So again, another cycle. And I'll think, right, okay, so I make my first incision as per the textbook. That went well. Give myself a pat on the back. Then the next step, okay, so I've identified the vein that I need to ligate. Yep, I ligate that. That goes well. Well done. Next step, and so on. So there are ways that you can use it like that. The main way that I ever use it realistically is just how the day is going to go. And especially before what could potentially be a busy shift, I just visualize how, you know what, it's under control, you've been fine every time before. And that helps you find the times where you actually deal with it in the way that you anticipated, rather than when you're visualizing without realizing, which is where you're disaster forecasting and you're watching the day go wrong before your eyes before it's happened. That's tuning that part of the brain that we talked about way back then. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of when you've imagined it go wrong 5 times, then you get to the actual day and your brain goes, well, this is the bit that you imagined and this is where you were right and this is what happened. And it turns maybe a bad half hour into a bad day. So hopefully that helps.
It really, really helps. One of the acronyms I really like is for fear is false evidence appearing real. So we always fear these things, and most of the time they don't happen. So yeah.
That's it. There's a Mark Twain quote that says a lot of terrible things happened in my life. I've seen a lot of terrible things in my life, most of which never happened. And
Exactly.
That's 100% how I used to feel for a long time. Like, so many of my patients died. I had so many complaints, yet in reality, I had no complaints. And none of those patients that I imagined died actually died. So it just shows you, regardless of external achievements, that so many of us have these similar thoughts, and jumping in and doing that visualization before means that we can enjoy things in advance or see things going well in advance, because otherwise we lose all of a Sunday worrying about Monday. And a lot of us feel not like a success at all and like everything's going wrong. But sometimes we have to take it back to the very basics of saying they did studies, I think it's a Harvard study where they worked out the odds of us being here as humans, for example. They started looking at the odds of your parents meeting each other, to your parents actually going on a date, to them deciding they're going to have children, to you surviving. And the minimum odds were 1 in 400 trillion of us being here as an individual. Then they started to look at, well, actually, you wouldn't be here if the 15 generations before you weren't here. And then when they looked at that, the odds were 1 in 10 to the power 2.685 million, which was the same as 2 million people in the same place rolling a trillion-sided dice, and I'm getting the same number on every single 2 million people, all the same number on this trillion-sided dice. And you start to think, you know what, and this was a big realization for me, all my life, my worth had been put on my achievements and my grades and what I'd managed to do. And that meant that if something was going to go wrong, it jeopardized my worth. And then I looked back and thought, you know what, we're just so lucky to actually be here and be alive. And if we can shift our focus to those things that we enjoy doing, why we enjoy doing them, why we're lucky, what we're grateful for, life changes a lot then, because our thoughts do lead to our feelings. And you think, oh my goodness, I'm here again. Because in the morning, we get that little imposter voice wants to run in and say, how are you going to prove that you should be here today? How are you going to prove that you're doing a good job? How are you going to prove that actually you do know what you're doing? And then you get to the end of another day and you feel relieved that you've just about got away with it again. But life's about so much more than that. And I think that's another driver behind my passion for imposter syndrome, is that I lost a lot of years to this autopilot of it'll be okay when you've done this and this and this and this, and almost in just default mode.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. You're always thinking, you know, if I think about myself, when this happens or when I get this, then everything is going to be good, you know? And you just got to live for today, right? Just like you said.
Absolutely, 100%. And that's where looking at just other people's stories and realizing, you know what, they've already done all those things. Like the internal medic that said, actually it was another podcast episode that I done where I talked with my friend who he has a diploma, and he said, actually, the more qualifications I got, I actually felt worse because there was more that I needed to know and more pressure on me. And I'd convinced myself for so long that when I got there, I'd be okay. And it wasn't looking at more qualifications, because that's almost like building an arm around yourself. That's what I was trying to do in my qualifications. It comes down to realizing what imposter syndrome is, realizing what we can do about it, having value for yourself, realizing that all those beliefs that you've got might not actually be true or deep-seated from something that actually was significant at the time that it happened, and being kinder to yourself. And then everything else falls into place around that, rather than you trying to fix things with external things. And that's certainly where I saw a huge difference when I realized that my worth as a human wasn't sat on how many letters I had after my name, how many patients that I cured, because that could be taken away. And that meant that that was vulnerable then to attack of, I was allowed to feel good if things were going good at work, but I wasn't allowed to feel good if things were going badly. So that I'd find then that I was very good at making mountains out of molehills, because as much as externally everything looked brilliant, one tiny little thing, because my brain was so tuned into looking for things going wrong, would then look huge. Like I'd not give antibiotics for, like, it should have been 2 days longer in my head. This would be a crazy example, but I'd be like, oh my goodness, you should have done that. You need to go back to work and sort this out. And it's mad looking back at it, but it would keep me up for very small mistakes. And again, that comes down to what we said right at the beginning. If things have got that bad, it's worth talking to a professional about it, rather than trying to fix and do that cycle, because that's the slippery slope, which is best helped from the beginning.
Katie, thanks so much. So guys, remember the acronym FRAUD. So it is fear, remind me.
Redirect. Story. A for alternative story, U for understand when it's going to come up, and D for discuss.
Yeah. And if you guys are feeling really anxious and you think that it's actually affecting your health, please, guys, go and see somebody. Katie, thanks. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more about you and how you help professionals, where could they go?
A few different places. I do have my own website, which is www.katiefordvet.com. I am soon due to bring out some online courses which people can sign up to that goes through this stuff in a bit more detail, because we know that imposter syndrome has taken years, so it's often more than sort of an hour podcast for you to realise the skills and sort of ingrain and just look at that wiring again and again and again. I do have social media accounts. My biggest following and where I'm most active is probably my Instagram account, which is Katie Ford Vets. I do have a Facebook page as well, which at the moment is Katie Ford Veterinary Coaching, and you'll find me on LinkedIn as well as Katie Ford.
Awesome. Guys, we'll put all those links in the description. Katie, thanks so much for your time. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant. I'm always delighted to talk more about this topic, because the more people that realise they're not alone with it and it's not necessarily true, the better. So thank you.
Thanks for all you do. Cheers, Katie. Bye.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. I'm here every week talking to vet rehab therapists from all over the world about all things vet rehab. For more information about continuing education for vet rehab therapists, you can go to onlinepethealth.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to this podcast, and of course, thank our sponsors, Response System. They are as passionate about therapy lasers and PEMF equipment as you are about veterinary rehabilitation. They would love to answer any questions you have, so please feel free to reach out to them at responsesystems.com, or you can email lisa@responsesystems.com.